Have you ever wondered if angels could appear in unexpected forms? In a small church in Burlington, Vermont, on a cold December evening, something extraordinary happened that would change not just one life, but two forever. Margaret Wilson, a 78-year-old widow, had been attending evening prayers at St. Michael's Chapel for over 4 decades. The church had become her sanctuary after losing her beloved husband James 5 years ago. She found solace in its weathered wooden pews and stained glass windows. Her silver hair always neatly pinned back, Margaret would walk the 3 blocks from her modest home to the church every evening, carrying her worn leather Bible and a small purse containing her meager savings, just enough to make her weekly donation to the church's food bank. That fateful evening, the church was unusually empty. The bitter cold had kept most parishioners at home, and even Father Thomas had left early due to a family emergency. Margaret sat alone in her usual spot, finding comfort in the flickering candlelight. Little did Margaret know that 2 shadows lurked in the darkness of the chapel's entrance. Tom and Rick, local thugs with a history of targeting vulnerable elderly citizens, had been watching her routine for days. The church's ancient heating system creaked and groaned, masking the sound of footsteps approaching behind Margaret. Her prayers were interrupted by the sudden feeling of cold metal pressed against her neck. "Don't make a sound, Grandma," a harsh voice whispered. "Just hand over your purse and whatever jewelry you've got." Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched her Bible tighter, tears welling in her eyes. In that moment of terror, Margaret thought about all the times she had questioned her faith since James's passing. Now, alone and afraid in the very place she sought refuge, she felt more abandoned than ever. The thugs grew impatient, roughly grabbing her arm. Margaret's soft whimper echoed through the empty church, seeming to bounce off the cold stone walls and disappear into the darkness. The stained glass windows cast eerie shadows on the floor, their holy figures seeming to look away as Margaret faced her attackers. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. What happened next would be talked about in Burlington for years to come. It began with a sound, a low, threatening growl that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Tom and Rick exchanged confused glances, momentarily distracted from their elderly victim. The growl grew louder, and then from behind the altar emerged a sight that would forever be etched in their memories. A large orange tabby cat, battle-scarred and fierce, stood with its back arched and teeth bared. Its green eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly intensity in the candlelight, fixed directly on the 2 men threatening Margaret. Through her tears, Margaret watched as the cat moved forward, its presence somehow filling the entire church with an energy she had never felt before. In that moment, she would later swear she felt James's presence beside her. The thugs burst into mocking laughter, their voices echoing through the sacred space like twisted hymns. Rick nudged Tom with his elbow, pointing at the fierce feline with unconcealed derision. Margaret felt her heart sink as she realized even this brave intervention might not be enough to save her. The cat's muscles rippled beneath its scarred orange fur as it inched closer, never breaking eye contact. This moment of tension stretched like an eternity in the cold church air. "Look at this pathetic thing thinking it's some kind of hero," Tom sneered, tightening his grip on Margaret's frail shoulder. His calloused fingers dug deeper into her flesh, causing her to whimper softly. The cat's ears twitched at the sound of her pain, its green eyes narrowing dangerously. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Margaret could feel her legs trembling beneath her Sunday best dress. Rick pulled out a switchblade, its metal catching the dim candlelight with an ominous gleam. The blade made a clicking sound as it snapped open, the noise unnaturally loud in the quiet church. He took a threatening step toward the cat, expecting it to flee. The feline remained steadfast, its battle-scarred face showing no sign of fear. The stained glass windows cast colored shadows across its fur, creating an almost ethereal effect. The cat's past was written in its scars, one across its left eye, another along its flank. These weren't the marks of a pampered house pet, but of a hardened street warrior. Each scar told a story of survival, of battles fought and won. The thugs might have been the kings of the streets, but this cat was a veteran of 1,000 alley wars. Its presence radiated an unmistakable aura of dangerous experience. Tom yanked Margaret's purse, causing her to cry out in pain. The cat's response was immediate, a low, bone-chilling growl that seemed to resonate through the entire church. The sound was unlike anything Margaret had ever heard from a cat before. It was primal, ancient, and terrifying. The marble saints watching from above seemed to hold their breath. Rick's hand trembled slightly as he held the knife, though he tried to hide it. The cat's unwavering stare had begun to unnerve him. Something about those eyes seemed almost human in their intelligence. There was a calculating patience in them that spoke of imminent violence. The air crackled with tension as both sides waited for the other to make the first move. Margaret silently prayed, her lips moving in a desperate whisper. She had always believed angels could take many forms. Looking at her fierce defender now, she wondered if perhaps she was witnessing divine intervention. The cat's presence seemed to fill the entire church with an energy she had never felt before. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the standoff continued. The first move came without warning, Rick lunging forward with his blade while Tom held Margaret in place. The cat exploded into action with supernatural speed and grace. Its movements were precise, calculated, and devastating. The church echoed with sounds of chaos as the battle began. Margaret could only watch in terrified amazement. What followed was a symphony of violence, the cat moving like liquid lightning between its two opponents. Its claws found their marks with surgical precision, targeting eyes, faces, and hands. Blood began to spot the ancient stone floor. The thug's confident sneers turned to looks of panic. They had severely underestimated their opponent. Rick screamed as razor-sharp claws raked across his face, drawing first blood. The cat was everywhere at once, its attacks coming from impossible angles. Tom tried to kick it away, but found only empty air. The feline seemed to anticipate every move before it happened. Its battle strategy showed an almost tactical intelligence. The fight moved through the church like a whirlwind, knocking over candles and prayer books. The cat used the environment to its advantage, leaping off pews and walls to strike from unexpected directions. Its attacks focused on disabling its opponents, rather than causing serious harm. Each move seemed carefully calculated for maximum effect. Blood dripped onto the church floor as the thugs tried desperately to defend themselves. The cat had transformed from a mere animal into an orange fury of retribution. Its eyes blazed with righteous anger as it protected its elderly charge. The thugs' earlier mockery had turned to genuine fear. They had never encountered anything like this before. Margaret watched in awe as her unlikely guardian drove the attackers back step by step. The cat moved with divine purpose, its actions precise and deliberate. Each attack forced the thugs further from Margaret, creating a protective barrier between them. The entire scene seemed surreal in the flickering candlelight. The stained glass saints above appeared to be watching with approval. Rick's face was now a maze of bleeding scratches, while Tom's hands were shredded from trying to grab the cat. Their confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by growing panic. The cat showed no signs of tiring, its attacks continuing with the same ferocious intensity. The thugs began to realize they were fighting something beyond their understanding. In a desperate move, Rick slashed wildly with his knife, catching the cat's shoulder and drawing blood. Instead of retreating, the cat's response became even more focused and determined. The sacred space filled with an almost electric energy. The cat's eyes seemed to glow brighter, its movements becoming impossibly precise. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the church. Margaret felt a familiar warmth wash over her, reminiscent of James's presence. The cat's fighting style suddenly reminded her of her late husband's boxing days. Each move was calculated, efficient, just as James had been. The similarities were uncanny, sending chills down her spine. The stained glass windows seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. The cat launched a series of coordinated attacks, moving with tactical precision. It herded the thugs toward the church entrance, never letting them circle back toward Margaret. Blood from its shoulder wound spotted the floor, yet it showed no sign of slowing. Its determination seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. The thieves began to realize they were fighting a losing battle. Their bravado crumbled as the cat's relentless assault continued. Tom's hands were shredded, making it impossible to maintain his grip on weapons. Rick's face was a maze of deep scratches, blood obscuring his vision. A profound silence fell over the church as the cat positioned itself atop the altar, its green eyes blazing. The candlelight created a halo effect around its battle-scarred form. Even through their fear and pain, the thugs couldn't help but stare. The scene felt surreal, almost biblical. The cat's next attack was swift and decisive. It launched itself directly at Rick's face, forcing him to stumble backwards into Tom. The momentum sent both men crashing into the heavy wooden doors. Their curses echoed through the sacred space. The cat stood its ground, ready for another round. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. A parishioner passing by had noticed the commotion and called for help. The cat's ears twitched at the sound, but it maintained its defensive position. Its unwavering focus remained on protecting Margaret. Tom and Rick exchanged panicked looks, realizing their situation was hopeless. They scrambled to their feet, abandoning their weapons in their haste to escape. The cat pursued them to the door, ensuring they truly fled. Its protective instincts remained strong despite its injury. Margaret slowly rose from her pew, her legs shaking, but her spirit strengthened. She approached her savior carefully, noticing how the cat's demeanor instantly softened. Its fierce warrior stance melted away, replaced by something gentler. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The approaching police lights cast alternating red and blue shadows through the stained glass. The cat turned to Margaret, its green eyes now filled with warmth rather than fury. She saw intelligence there, and something more, a familiar soul. Tears began to fall freely down her cheeks. Kneeling carefully, Margaret extended her hand to the wounded cat. Without hesitation, it limped toward her, pressing its head against her palm. The connection was instant and profound. She felt James's presence stronger than ever, as if he had sent this guardian to watch over her. The cat's shoulder wound needed attention, but its focus remained on comforting Margaret. It purred softly, the sound echoing through the now quiet church. The violence of moments ago seemed like a distant memory. A deep peace settled over the sacred space. Father Thomas arrived with the police, freezing at the threshold as he took in the scene. Margaret sat in the front pew, cradling her wounded protector. Blood spots dotted the floor, telling the story of the battle. The entire church seemed transformed by what had transpired. Margaret looked up at Father Thomas, her eyes shining with certainty. "This was no ordinary cat," she said softly, stroking its scarred head. "God sends angels in many forms." The cat's purring grew louder, as if in agreement. A bond had been forged that would never be broken. Margaret's life transformed in the days following the attack. The neighborhood rallied around her, bringing food and comfort. Word of James's heroic defense spread through Burlington like wildfire. The cat remained vigilant by her side as she recovered from the trauma. Police officers interviewed her, amazed by her detailed account of her feline protector's tactical prowess. The veterinarian who treated James's shoulder wound discovered he was indeed a stray, likely living near the church. His body bore the marks of street survival, yet his temperament was remarkably gentle with Margaret. She didn't hesitate to officially adopt him, seeing it as divine providence. The vet remarked she'd never seen such intelligence in a cat's eyes. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing James the guardian angel cat of St. Michael's. Reporters were fascinated by the elderly woman and her scarred protector. The story touched hearts across Vermont. Animal shelters reported increased adoption rates, especially among elderly residents seeking companionship. Father Thomas held a special blessing ceremony for James, who sat regally at Margaret's feet throughout the service. The priest spoke of God's mysterious ways and how protection can come in unexpected forms. Every parishioner swore they could feel something unique about James's presence. His green eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom. James took his guardian role seriously, escorting Margaret everywhere she went. He would walk beside her to church, scanning constantly for threats. At home, he always positioned himself between her and the door. His protective instincts never wavered, though his demeanor remained gentle with those he trusted. The police never apprehended Tom and Rick, but their crime spree in Burlington ended that night. Stories circulated about their injuries, deep scratches that would leave permanent scars. Local criminals began avoiding St. Michael's neighborhood entirely. James's reputation became almost mythical. Margaret's faith deepened profoundly through this experience. Where once she questioned God's presence after losing her husband, she now saw divine intervention in James's arrival. Her testimony at church gatherings moved many to tears. She spoke of angels taking unexpected forms and God's perfect timing. The bond between woman and cat grew stronger each passing day. James seemed to anticipate Margaret's needs before she expressed them. On days when grief over her late husband surfaced, James would sit closer, offering silent comfort. His purrs became her lullaby on difficult nights. The church community embraced them both as living symbols of faith and protection. Children would respectfully approach to pet James, who showed remarkable patience while remaining alert. Elderly parishioners felt safer knowing the guardian angel cat watched over their services. His presence became an integral part of church life. Margaret discovered new purpose through this experience. She began volunteering at local animal shelters, sharing her story to promote senior pet adoption. James would accompany her, his regal bearing and battle scars lending weight to their mission. Together, they inspired countless successful adoptions. The transformation in Margaret was remarkable to witness. The fearful widow became a confident community leader, with James always by her side. She started a support group for elderly pet owners, creating a network of companionship and security. Their weekly meetings became highlights of church community life. James's reputation continued to grow, but fame never changed him. He remained focused solely on Margaret's well-being. Their evening walks became neighborhood fixtures, the elegant elderly lady and her battle-scarred protector. Children would wave from windows, feeling safer, knowing they were watching over the street. Other churches in Burlington began hosting pet blessing services, inspired by James's story. The movement spread across Vermont, leading to increased support for animal shelters and senior adoption programs. Margaret would speak at these events, James sitting proudly beside her. Their story touched countless lives. The scars from that night faded, but the miracle remained. Margaret and James's bond deepened beyond ordinary pet companionship. In quiet moments, she would catch his green eyes watching her with that same otherworldly intelligence that had saved her life. She knew with certainty that divine love had brought them together. 1 year after the incident, St. Michael's Chapel held a special anniversary service. The pews were filled with faces touched by Margaret and James's story. Local shelter volunteers brought updates about lives changed through their inspiration. News crews captured the elderly woman and her guardian entering the church together. Father Thomas spoke eloquently about divine intervention and second chances. The stained glass windows cast familiar patterns across James's scarred orange fur as he sat attentively. Margaret's silver hair caught the same light, creating a matching glow. The congregation listened intently to every word about faith's mysterious ways. Margaret rose to share her testimony, James padding silently beside her to the pulpit. She spoke of darkness and light, of loss and redemption. Her voice carried strength now, where once there had been only grief. The cat's steady presence grounded her through every powerful word. The police chief attended, presenting a special community service award. Crime rates had dropped significantly in Burlington's church districts. Stories of the guardian angel cat continued deterring potential troublemakers. James accepted the attention with characteristic dignity, never wavering from his protective stance. Elderly adoption rates at local shelters had tripled over the year. Margaret's support group now spanned 3 churches, creating a network of companionship. Each success story traced back to that fateful night when a battle-scarred stray chose to become a guardian. The local veterinary clinic started a James's Fund for treating injured strays. Something about his story touched people's hearts, opening them to possibilities of redemption. Margaret would often bring him to visit newly rescued cats, his presence somehow calming their fears. James's own scars had faded slightly, but remained visible reminders of his courage. He wore them like medals of honor, each mark telling part of their shared story. His green eyes retained that mysterious depth that first captured Margaret's attention. The church itself seemed transformed, filled with new energy and purpose. Pet blessing services became monthly events, drawing people from across Vermont. James would sit regally through each one, as if understanding his role in this ongoing miracle. Margaret's own transformation was the most remarkable. Gone was the fearful widow who questioned her faith. In her place stood a community leader who spoke confidently about divine love's unexpected forms. James remained her constant shadow, their bond deeper than ever. Sometimes in quiet moments, Margaret would catch James staring at her husband's photograph. Those green eyes seemed to hold secrets beyond mortal understanding. She never questioned the connection she felt between her two protectors. The thugs were eventually arrested in another state, still bearing James's scars. They spoke fearfully of their encounter with something beyond natural explanation. Their testimony added to the growing legend of St. Michael's guardian angel cat. Burlington's church community had been forever changed by their story. Other congregations began similar outreach programs, creating safe spaces for elderly residents and their animal companions. The ripple effects continued spreading outward. Looking back, Margaret understood that her darkest moment had become her greatest blessing. James dozed in sunbeams, but remained alert to her every movement. Their story had become a testament to faith, courage, and love's transformative power. Through James, Margaret had rediscovered not just safety, but purpose. Together, they continued their mission, touching lives and inspiring faith. The battle-scarred street cat and the widow had found salvation in each other, proving that miracles come in unexpected forms.